who knows the status of Puerto Rico? Colony. Colony. Well, we got a colony, we got territory. Anybody else? Okay. All right. In order to put this in perspective and understand why people struggle for a person like Oscar Lopez Rivera, so why a person like me would go to prison at the age of 23 in order to defend the right of Puerto Rico, we have to have a historical perspective. The person here, officially Puerto Rico is, en español, it will be Estado Libre Asociado. In English, they have translated to become a commonwealth. If we first do the Spanish one, Estado Libre Asociado, we translate it, it says Estado, state, free, and associated. If you think about that, that's an impossibility. It's a contradiction of terminology. A nation cannot be independent, free, and associated at the same time. And then you translate it in English to a commonwealth. So that's an impossibility. Unfortunately, it has been clarified on the international level. The United Nations has declared Puerto Rico since 1948, as a matter of fact, when the League of Nations was made, what today is called the United Nations, that Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States. You know, subsequently in 1960, when the Discolonization Committee of the United Nations was made, Puerto Rico, of course, is part of the nations that are colonized. Puerto Rico happens to be a colony of the United States. Colonialism is an international crime, an international crime against humanity. For a nation, does anybody know what colonialism is? I know you do. No? All right. What do you?
It's where a nation seeks out other places, comes in, suppresses the native populations, and begins to exploit resources and the both natural and human for the betterment of the, lack of a better term, parent nation.
That's right. It's the exploitation and under control of another nation, economically, politically, and socially. Exactly what has happened in Puerto Rico. Now, how does Puerto Rico become a colony? First of all, in 1898, United States invaded Puerto Rico. You know, and I say an invasion because that's what it was. It was an invasion where the nation of Puerto Rico in 1997 had a charter of autonomy on its way to its independence. After the Spanish-American War, the United States was given by Spain Puerto Rico, Philippines, illegally. Now, for Puerto Rico, it becomes much more of an issue because we had in 1897 a charter of autonomy on our way. We had our own postal system, we had our own money, we had our own government on our way to become independent. Unfortunately, in 1898, July 25th, the United States militarily invaded Puerto Rico. General Miles was the one who was head of the invasion. Do we know who General Miles is? General Miles is the person most noted for the slaughter of Native Americans here in the United States. So there they gave him the next nice project of invading Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico was invaded in 1998. They declared martial law immediately in Puerto Rico, took down the existing government, declared martial law, and also put a curfew. Puerto Ricans, for the next 2 years, could not come out of their house from 5 o'clock on in the evening. They were maintained inside their house after 5 o'clock during the day they come. Other than that, they will not be able to come out. Repression as far as talking anything about movements, independence, or anything on the matter that had politically, you will pay a price for it. It lasted to 1900s. In 1900s, Puerto Rico opens up again, supposedly, but under the same conditions that United States completely controls it, and also does all the governorship and anything that would control who will govern Puerto Rico came from the military. In 1917, Puerto Rico is made American citizens. Puerto Ricans did not ask to become American citizens. The Jones Act of 1917 was forcefully put on Puerto Rico. Why do I say forcefully? Because the legislature in Puerto Rico had a vote for citizenship. And how many people voted for citizenship for the United States? This many. The legislature. The United States did not decide that this was not the expression of the Puerto Rican people, and they did not care. It's a colony, so they said, you're going to become American citizens. In 1917, we became American citizens by force. Anybody who did not accept American citizenship will have to have signed a green card in their own country. Okay? The next thing that we know in 1917 is what does the United States does in 1917? They enter what? World War I. And guess who gets drafted immediately to go to World War I? The Puerto Rican nation. And that time, in 1917, we had to serve in the military. Now, out of all the Latino groups, many Latino groups say that we are fortunate that we are American citizens, but Puerto Ricans do pay a price for that, because in 1922, the case of Puerto Rico goes to the Supreme Court, and because of the colonial status and because of the invasion, Puerto Rico then is declared by the Supreme Court as Puerto Rico belongs to the United States, but it's not part of the United States. Therefore, just as I have this hat in my hand that I take it off and I put it on, and I put it in my closet and I use it, and when I finish with it, I can throw it away. That's the relationship we have with Puerto Rico, because in the last analysis, the final situation of Puerto Rico and all laws that pertain to Puerto Rico, the United States has the last veto. So, in essence, we're not part of this country, but then Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico are drafted to the military. They have been drafted since World War I, World War II, the Korean War, which is very, very famous, were declared big heroes in the Korean War, Vietnam, with outstanding casualties that we pertain. This is the relationship again of Puerto Rico having a colonial situation. In the 1920s, after the decision of before that, we had one of the greatest Puerto Ricans that is known in the 20th century, Don Pedro Alviso Campos, comes into play. He believes in the democracy and the freedom of the United States, and actually goes to World War I. But he also is a Harvard-educated man, a military strategist. So in his capacity, he goes to the war thinking that he's going to help. It is to his surprise that when he goes, and we understand in 1917 the racism and the segregation that existed in the United States, that he no longer is seen as a very intelligent, bright man, but that he would not be a strategist, but he would be isolated and segregated with the people of color. That's when he realized that the illusion of freedom for everybody was not really that freedom that he so-called wished that he had. He then continued in Harvard. He had various doctor's degree, and he became the #1 student in Harvard. Unfortunately, not given to him because, again, he's a man of color, and it was given to the second runner-up, and he became the valedictorian. From that day on is when Puerto Rico, Don Pedro changes his life and changes the perspective that he had on the United States. And then he starts to become the president of the Nationalist Party. And the Nationalist Party becomes the focal point of the Puerto Rican independence movement. Don Pedro is one of the best orators ever in the history of Puerto Rico, and that's not recognized just by people from the Puerto Rican independence movement, but in general, the brilliancy of this man and the orator that he was. So he was able to pull many, many people to his side and for the Puerto Rican independence movement. But unfortunately, the United States also had other plans. They couldn't afford to take and have a man that would organize for Puerto Rican independence. There's a reason why the United States wanted Puerto Rico, and that is because of the military location of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is located in one of the best military strategic its location, because where it sits, it has control of the Caribbean Sea, the Atlantic Ocean, Central America, and South America. And we know, anybody who knows about invasions from Puerto Rico, we can actually see that some of the invasions that had taken place in Latin America and in Grenada were from Puerto Rico. So that's one of the main reasons they had it. Now, And when we see that Puerto Ricans were actually supporting independence, and the Nationalist Party was a vocal point in Puerto Rico, United States commenced its repression. And it's that time that in 1936, Don Pedro Alviso Campos is incarcerated with the leadership of the Nationalist Party and charged with seditious conspiracy. Does anybody know what seditious conspiracy is? All right, seditious conspiracy is a law that was enacted in the United States during the Civil War. And the Civil War, we all know, was the fight between the North and the South about what? Slavery, okay? That if you would cross the North or the South, you would be seditious. Now, in 1936, Don Pedro and the Nationalist leadership of the Nationalist Party is charged with seditious conspiracy. I just told you that in 1922, the United Nations declared that Puerto Rico belongs to the United States, but it's not part of the United States. So how can a Puerto Rican be seditious if you are not part of that country? Seditious conspiracy has never been used during the war. The Civil War, it was never used. It's been in the books since the 1800s. Never had been used, and the first time that it was used was for the Puerto Rican independence movement. And that's when we see the emergence of the United States to repress and make sure that the independence movement is not successful. He goes in jail, and there is also a demonstration for him in 1937. In 1937, in Puerto Rico, the abolition of slavery is a national holiday. So it's a day off, but they commemorate it. In 1937, in Ponce, there was a demonstration, and of course, there is a commemoration of the abolition of slavery. The cadets of the Republic were from the Nationalist Party, carried guns, wooden guns on their hand. They weren't real guns. And they knew they were not real guns. The United States came in and bombarded. They shot and they killed 21 persons and wounded 150. It is after that that United States, they were filed, and that one of the biggest civil rights violations to the Puerto Rican people were made during that time. Don Pedro Alviso comes out again in 1947 after 10 years incarcerated. During the time, repression in Puerto Rico continues. And of course, we see the emergence of one of the persons most responsible for repression in Puerto Rico and in the United States. And that is the head of the FBI, Edgar Hoover. And Edgar Hoover, if anybody knows historically, and is one of the persons that's responsible for the repression of many, many movements here in the United States. We look at Edgar Hoover, what he participated in, we did to AIM, the American Indian movement, what he did to the Mexican movement, what he did to the Black movement, and what he did to the independence movement. That is very well documented, and after many years, a lot of the Freedom of Information Act, a lot of that information has been released. But if you ever want to see more detail, there's a video called COINTEL in the freedomofarchives.org that you can see, and you can see the things that he did in order to destroy. COINTEL is extremely very, very important because of what it did also to the Black nation. This is the people who actually, he was the one who made documents in order to create division and conquer. In the Black movement, the Black Panther Party especially, but people that you would know more readily will be the documents that were made against Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, that maintained that division throughout all their history, because if they would have united, they would have had much more to deal with. In Puerto Rico, that was the first documents of COINTEL were made in Puerto Rico in 1959. Since that time, they have been there in order to destroy the Puerto Rican independence movement. In 1948, the League of Nations is established, which today is called the United Nations. They made a list of those colonized nations that existed and neo-colonial nations that existed, and their right to freedom. It was announced that Puerto Rico was a colony of the United States. And therefore, in order for them not to be in violation of international law, they were going to rectify the problem. They introduced, and they started to introduce, an Estado Libre Asociado, in which they were actually in 1950s talking about it. It is at that time in 1950, because they were going to continue with the status of Puerto Rico, which has not changed since 1898, since the Four-Actor Act and the other act, the situation of Puerto Rico has not changed. Because of that violation, they were to maintain Puerto Rico in the status and lie to the nation. In 1950, Oscar Collazo and Gricielo Torresora go to the Blair House, which is the residence of the president, when it's usually the resident of the vice president. But at that time, Truman was there because they were renovating the White House. And because of that response and the world tension, they wanted to respond to what the colonial situation, they went to kill President Truman. Torresora was killed instantly. Oscar Collazo was shot. He recuperated and he was given the death penalty in 1950. Due to that death penalty, the Puerto Rican nation would not have allowed that to happen, and there was a massive international campaign to make sure that it was overturned. And Truman did exactly that. The pressure of the international community did overturn, and in 1951 he was given a life sentence and kept in jail from 1950. In 1952, El Estado Libre Asociado comes to play. During this time, I have to say that La Ley de la Mordaza existed in Puerto Rico, which is very similar to the Smith Law Act here in the United States. And the Ley de la Mordaza says that if you meet for Puerto Rican independence, or you meet as a group, if you write about independence of Puerto Rico, if you even fly the Puerto Rican flag, you will go to jail. And that is very, very well documented in books and la Ley de la Mordaza, that this was the repression that existed in Puerto Rico in order to repress the Puerto Rican independence movement. In 1950, we couldn't even fly our own flag because that would be illegal. In 1952, what's called El Estado Libre Asociado comes to play, and it's approved by the Puerto Rican nation. But before it's approved, the one that had to approve it was the United States Congress and the President, because everything has to go through their hands. Once they approve it and they took out the things that they did not want, then it went to vote. And in there, we were been able to fly the Puerto Rican flag for the first time, but it must be flown with the United States flag. In response to that, in 1954, Lolita Lebron, which headed the commando, went to the Congress of the United States and shot the Congress up, and the significant symbols of the Congress, in order to put world attention that even though they now call Puerto Rico a Commonwealth, a territory, or Estado Libre Asociado, that Puerto Rico continues to be a colony of the United States, which is illegal. They were caught, of course, and they were sentenced to 50 and 75 years. In 1960s, the Decolonization Committee comes to play again in world politics of the United Nations. And of course, they make another listing of nations that are colonialized. Even though the United States tried to hide the fact, unfortunately, after deep investigation in the international community, Puerto Rico again is declared a colony of the United States. But there's more emphasis now, because we have colonies in different parts of Latin America and in Africa. Now they are protecting those who fight against a nation that is colonialized. And they said if a nation is declared a colony and they are part of a colonial freedom-fighting movement, they are not to be treated as domestic criminals, but are to be considered freedom fighters or prisoners of war. That is the dictate of international law. Puerto Rico, being part of Latin America, not United States, being a colony, that was our right to do. And if we look at things historically, you have to put this in perspective. Because in Latin America, in that particular time, you had dictatorship in Guatemala, in Honduras, El Salvador, El Chile, in Argentina, in Venezuela, and you had in Africa, Mozambique, Namibia, and the one that everybody knows, South Africa. There you go. And they all, each and every one of them, all had an armed struggle existing for the liberation of their country. That is an inalienable right, that a nation has the right to be free and independent and not to be criminalized because they have a movement for liberation. I think when we look at things, we cannot take things out of perspective. When you look at something and a movement, you have to look at the subjective and objective conditions of that particular historical moment. And that is the decision that people make in what direction they go. And that was the direction in the 60s and 70s. Not only did we see it in Latin America, not only did we see it in Africa, but right here in this country we saw it with the black nation. Because there was also an armed struggle here in civil rights. We not only had Martin Luther King, we also had Malcolm X, but we also had a Black Liberation Army and the Black Panthers. And when we talk about political prisoners, Oscar's been there 33 years. I was there 20. The longest held political prisoners in this country are not Puerto Ricans, are blacks, who have been in prison 43, 42, 40 years still. You know, Herman Bell, Jalil, Maroon, all have over 40 years incarcerated, completely forgotten, and their role, because they actually accelerated the civil rights movement in this country, and they have been forgotten. And that was the inalienable right, because if not, there would have been no justice for the black nation in this country. And those are the things that we look at armed struggle, we have to put it in perspective. And every time that changes. So we have now in existence 5 nationalists that were in prison, you know. So, but the movement in Puerto Rico continues, and now because everything was very public and people were going to prison, Puerto Ricans, like every other nation in Latin America, decided to have urban guerrillas and rural guerrillas. Rural guerrillas were in Latin America and, of course, in Africa. In Puerto Rico, for that case, we had urban guerrillas. And that's when the urban underground movements happened in Puerto Rico in the 60s and in the 70s. It is out of that perspective, historical account is that we now have, we had 5 military groups in Puerto Rico that existed, you know, in defense of Puerto Rican independence, and 1 here. So in 1980, out of not because the United States or the FBI did good police work, you know, they were captured. In 1980, 11 Puerto Ricans were captured, 6 men and 5 women. And charged with what? Seditious conspiracy. That's right. Another, again, it comes to play against the Puerto Rican independence movement. In 1981, Oscar Lopez is put in prison, charged with seditious conspiracy. In 1983, 4 more independentistas are caught and charged with seditious conspiracy. We put a brief to the United States that we are colonial fighters, we're freedom fighters of a colonial movement for freedom of Puerto Rico and not to be tried to domestic law. That was denied to us. In response to that, because we did not want our movement criminalized, we refused to participate in the proceedings. We refused to participate in any kind of jury. The jury never saw us. We never presented any kind of defense at all. They presented whatever they wanted, and they could have done whatever they want, which they did. We were all found guilty, of course, and sentenced between 55 and 105 years. In my particular case, I had a 98-year sentence to be going home in the year 2044, which of course I would have been dead. But due to international law, international campaign, like the one that we did for the nationalists, they were in prison till 79, but in 1970s when I became aware of the Puerto Rican independence movement and I became who I was as a Puerto Rican, I became part of the Free the Five nationalists. And Jimmy Carter, during his term, was a human rights had a human rights issue about worldwide violations of human rights. And one time he was speaking publicly on an international level, and somebody approached him and says, "Why would you talk about human rights when in your own place you have 5 political prisoners that are from the nationalist movement, and they're there for a colonial situation?" In September of 1979, right before he left, when Jimmy Carter released the 5 nationalists out of prison. 6 months later, we go to prison. You know, historically, there's been Puerto Ricans in the prisons, in United States for political reasons since 1936 on and off. Very, very few times in the years has there not been a Puerto Rican that's been in prison for political reasons. So through that international effort, we were able to achieve his freedom. In 1980, we go to prison. Again, the international campaign is developed. It goes through all different, and who we get as support. We have Nobel laureates. But people that you would know, of course, is one of the biggest supporters of us was Nelson Mandela. Why? What was Nelson Mandela charged with? Seditious conspiracy, that's right. The identical, you know, charge that they gave us, okay? And so he was a big supporter of our freedom. You know, Desmond Tutu is also, you know, also one of the prime, you know, and most of the Nobel laureates. You know, this issue of Puerto Rico and about political prisoner, it is a human rights issue. Today we see a whole different dynamic of what has happened in Puerto Rico, because it's very rarely that when there is movements in the world, there's always a period of reconciliation after a movement happens. And if there's people that are incarcerated, you know, at that reconciliation, they are integrated back into society. That has not been the case for the United States, since they still have people from the American Indian movement still in prison. They still have people from the black movement still in prison, you know, and of course the destruction of the Mexican movement that they had here in the United States. Due to the fact that now we, you know, after I came out in 1999, and our co-defendants, you know, we of course integrated ourselves back into society. But then we have a different world. At one time, the armed struggle existed. Today, when we look in Latin America, and after the apartheid had won, after apartheid was eliminated, and in Central America goes into a whole different kind of direction, we see that armed struggle is not one of the solutions for problems that are existed worldwide. So, knowing that Puerto Rico is part of Latin America, and that you historically know that when we are in a movement that we have to base our decisions based on those historical times, we also then at that time renounced violence. And for the last 14 years that we've been out, we have been productive, good citizens. Now, Oscar in 1999 was given an opportunity to leave, and he rejected it. He rejected it because Oscar is a very principled person. In 1966, Oscar is drafted to the Vietnam War, and he goes. He goes because he wants to be part of a fight that he thought was legitimate. When he goes to Vietnam and he looks at the people and he looks at the situation of what they're going through, he goes, "What am I doing here? These people are just like Puerto Ricans in our society, and we're here killing them?" So he comes to realize certain things. Now, he belongs to a platoon. During the platoon, there was a bomb exploded in the platoon. Everybody, of course, left. Oscar decided that, no, I'm not leaving. And the people that were left, he saved. All the people that were left in front of the platoon, he saved. Because of his heroic act, and because of his dedication and not to leave anybody behind, the United States government gave him a Bronze Star, which is one of the highest award for heroics in the time of war. And that Bronze Star was given to Oscar. Go back 1999, when they're giving us our clemency after we negotiate with the United States about our freedom, he is on the list. But 2 people are not on the list. And Oscar said, if I did it in 1967 during Vietnam, I will do it now. Until everybody leaves, I will not leave. And he rejected the offer. And the other fact was that also they wanted him to do 10 more years of unblemished disciplinary, which they can do anytime, because if they write you a disciplinary report, that would have been it. He would have to stay. But he stayed. Carlos Alberto Torres, the last one to leave, after serving 30 years, was released on July 25th, 2010. After his release, Oscar says, I'm ready to leave. Now note the fact that if he would have taken the offer, he would have already been out in 2009. All right? And Oscar has stayed, and then Carlos Alberto came out in July, and then we started the movement to free Oscar. But the FBI was very furious that everybody had come out. They did not think that we were going to, because they completely opposed our freedom. They opposed when Clinton gave us the offer, and he, of course, was very furious when Carlos Alberto also came out. So they want somebody to pay. But the only thing is that we have to look at things historically. He went to the parole board, and in the parole board, the FBI came in and presented a case that we were not even charged with, and they were allowed to testify. Now, mind you that I told you that we did not present a defense. That if the United States wanted to put whatever they wanted to and charge us with it, they could have done it, because we didn't present any kind of defense. But what they put in that report and what they did in his parole hearing, it was not one of the charges. That is completely illegal. Unfortunately, he had to stay, and they told him that he had to stay to the year 2023, which will make him 80 years old. And that we're not going to allow in the Puerto Rican independence movement. Where is the liberation of Oscar today? Today, Oscar enjoys the support of every sector of society in Puerto Rico. That includes the statehood party. The people who want Puerto Rico to become a state, from Teoluisi, which is the commissioner resident, supports Oscar release. The mayor of the town where Oscar will be going back, to live, San Sebastian, is a prime leader of the statehood movement. Very, very prominent, very powerful. Unconditional support to Oscar Lopez Rivera. Okay? The Popular Party in Puerto Rico, who are in power today, from the governor of Puerto Rico, supports the release of Oscar Lopez Rivera. The mayor of Puerto Rico supports the release of Oscar Lopez Rivera. The great majority of Puerto Ricans support, and the mayors of Puerto Rico support him. Religious, the Catholic, the Archbishop of Puerto Rico, the Evangelicals, the Baptists, the Methodists. There's not all civil groups. There's not one group that does not support the release of Oscar. This is not a political issue. This is now one of the biggest human rights violations the United States commits every day that he continues to have Oscar Lopez incarcerated. And that response, after he's had already been talked to, the holder, which is his Attorney General, was the person that we negotiated our freedom with. Obama comes from Chicago. He knows our case very well, but more so, his Attorney General knows more, because he was the one who recommended our release. And during the Senate hearing, when he was to become Attorney General, they put him on the stand and they asked him, why did you release the FAON nationalists? And Holder said, I have made bad decisions and I have made good decisions. But one decision that I will stand by to this day as I speak to you is the release of the Puerto Rican nationalists. They deserve to have been released, and I stand with that decision. He was confirmed as Attorney General. Okay? So Now the issue is, in Puerto Rico, there's not a problem. On November 23rd, we had a demonstration for Oscar in Puerto Rico. Over 50,000 people showed up in support of the freedom of Oscar. But more significant is that the leadership of the Statehood Party was there, the leadership of the Popular Party was there, and of course the leadership of the Independence movement was there. There is no question about the situation of Oscar's freedom in Puerto Rico. Today, we are now going to, from different places in order to let know that United States, who call themselves the champions of human rights, are one of the biggest violators of human rights. And why do I say that? Because on the international level, they are numbered who are the biggest violators of human rights. Number one violator of human rights will be Israel. That's definitely without doubt, and the cause of the independence of the Palestinians. The second biggest violators of human rights is the United States. There's only one country that has not signed the Covenant of Human Rights in the world, and that again is the United States. So even though, and if we look at the other situations in this country and the violation of human rights in this country, the migration movement, the deportation of people, we see more human rights violations. So, it is an issue now that once there was a political issue, this is no longer a political issue, this is an issue of human rights. And why do you continue to incarcerate somebody who, because of his involvement in the Puerto Rican independence movement, will continue to be incarcerated after 32.5 years. And what we're doing now is we're getting a petition, we're educating people in order to tell them about what's going on with Oscar and why he has not released. And a lot of people will realize how come Puerto Ricans, have not rejoiced, have not gone to other sectors, because the sector of independence, you say that, oh, but it's a small sector of independence. When I go to Puerto Ricans and I take a survey and I ask Puerto Ricans, who's the father of our country? And I took a survey in Puerto Rico, 90% could not answer that simple question. Who is the father of our country? But I asked at the same survey, who is George Washington and who he is, and 95% got it right. Why? Because in Puerto Rico, Puerto Rican history is not taught. And when you don't teach your country, your people, your history of who you are, where you are, you don't know where you're going. And there's a big confusion. Because in Puerto Rico, that does not happen. Puerto Rican history is not taught. And even though people who in Puerto Rico, we have like the Statehood Party and the Popular Party, they're not there for ideology-wise. They're there because it's an economic solution to their existence. Because if a certain party wins, guess what you get? A job. And that's what the reality is. Because when I ask somebody who's a statehood, what is the significance of statehood and what does that mean, they won't be able to answer. Same thing as when I ask somebody what is Puerto Rico's political status, they do not know. And that's it, when you deny people their own history, you deny their own existence. And this is something that we as Puerto Ricans have to do. Lastly, I know that I want to open this up to questions. I want to thank each and every one of you. And I know that I've gone through everything quite quickly, but hopefully in this discussion maybe we can answer some questions and you might get a better understanding of who or where Puerto Rico is and who is Oscar Lopez Rivera. Thank you. I'm open for any questions, comments, or
you talked about national oppression and national liberation, and I was wondering if you, and I guess this is kind of a two-part question, if I can answer, but you talked about national oppression and national liberation, and I was wondering if you could explain what defines a nation, or what are the characteristics of a nation, and also you talked about national oppression within the borders of the U.S., and specifically the Black nation. And I was wondering if there are any other oppressed nations within the U.S., and if you could talk about that.
Okay. what defines a nation? If we look at United States and Puerto Rico, you know, what common denominators do we have with them? First of all, we speak a different language. You know, second of all, we have different music. Second of all, we have a different cuisine. I don't know United States cuisine because it's really of different countries, and then they make their own. Okay, so those three, and we have a land base. We have an island that is an island that is ours, that defines our country. And we look historically, when does the nation of Puerto Rico emerges? We were a colony of Spain for 400 years. And now since 1898, we've been a colony of the United States. But in 1868, the conscience of the Puerto Rican nation comes about. Why? Because we are mergers of three people. The African slave that would go there, the Taino Indian, and the Spaniard. The first ones to have the island, of course, is the Taino Indians. Then comes Spain, and then they invaded us in 1493. Then comes the slave trade. Now, during the time, they said that if you will get to the mountaintop, you know, you will become a free person. And that would go from word to word, whatever which way they did, but they would know that. Combined with the natives, because they slaughtered the natives in Puerto Rico, the Taino Indians, and they went to the mountaintop, they lived there peacefully. Along came the Africans, lived peacefully, and those Spaniards who were in sympathy with them. Those three nations all mixed together to create the Puerto Rican nation. That's why in Puerto Rico, when you see Puerto Ricans, you might see a Puerto Rican like me, right? But then you might see a Puerto Rican much lighter than me, and you might see a Puerto Rican much darker than me. And in Puerto Rico, we have what was called blue-black, you know, in Loíza. So the preservation of the African ancestry is very well preserved in Puerto Rico. So no longer in 1860, in the early 1800s, do Puerto Rican, the people who lived there, consider themselves Spaniards, Africans, or Taínos, but Puerto Ricans. And that made the conscience of the Puerto Rican nation emerges at that time. We have a very defined culture, a very defined language, a very defined music, a very defined literature, very defined artists. You know, that constitutes a nation. A nation that is not in anything compared to this one. You know, because we don't have the common denominator, it's not there. Other,
I don't have a question, so to speak. I disagree because right here in this nation we have different languages, we have different music, we have different food. So I don't think that necessarily because I'm Puerto Rican. I'm from Jersey, my parents, family. I got family Puerto Rican, I've been there a million times. We don't populate. But I don't necessarily agree that we can be a nation together because of our differences, because that's what America is. We're based on differences. And because of what we went through there, and the same things as people have gone through here. And I appreciate everything that you said, but that's just like saying the blacks should separate. Because they have different music, and they have different language, and they weren't asked to come here. But I think that time, we've evolved. Now, do I agree with what has gone on? Of course, but that doesn't mean that now in this day and age that we can't come together or we have to be independent because something that happened in the 1800s. Because nobody can control what happened back then. But that shouldn't define what's going on now.
You first of all, to compare the black nation to us is different because that's
but I didn't compare.
No. You said that different people are here. Okay, this is a nation. You know, this is a nation. Why are you going to say that our nation is not a nation? And you say well, we are a nation. We have a right to our independence, and we are a different people. You know, we have a different language. The official language of this country is what?
Nothing.
You know, but everybody talks English.
No.
No, not everybody talks English in Puerto Rico. No.
Not everybody. Not everybody in America talks English.
No.
Spoken widely.
Huh?
At the same
What?
time, not everybody in America speaks English. If you
No,
go over that
but
now.
business is done in English. Education is done in English.
Other countries
Oh,
do that as well.
no. See, if you have to look what defines a nation in order to understand what a nation is. It's not what you as a person think it is. It is that it's defined internationally what is a nation. And that's, as if we look at that definition internationally, Puerto Rico is a nation. Okay? And it has its right to its independence. If we have an association with the United States, that's fine. I don't have no problems with that. But let me, as a Puerto Rican, control my destiny and let me do what I want to do with my nation. I don't need a veto from over there. I don't need to be an American citizen when I can have a relationship with you. I don't need for you to impose war on me. I don't need for you to be drafted me and take me to a war that I have nothing to do with and die for something that does not belong. After we know about these wars, we find out that they're not legitimate wars. Okay? So that defines a nation. This is a melting pot. You know, because if I tell you, you know, what is the food of this country, what is it? Nothing. But I can tell you what food Puerto Rican eat. I can tell you arroz con gandules, I can tell you pollo guisado, I can tell you arroz con pollo, I can tell you pasteles, I can tell you tostones. That defines us as a nation. Okay? It's very distinguishable. You know, so that makes a world of a difference on an international level, yes. And what happened before does count. Yes, it does count, because you can change a country based on what they did. What they did to the Africans, to the blacks in this country, nobody else has done. Chattel slavery is the most horrendous thing that has ever been done to a people, to strip them of their conscience, of their name, of their family, of their history, not allow them to read, not allow them to be educated. Nobody in the world has done that. There's slaveries in another place and I existed, but the family unit was kept together. That didn't exist here.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something maybe to clarify your point. My name is Hector, I'm from Puerto Rico too. And I served in the military for 24 years. But the problem of Puerto Rico is not that we cannot get along with people. Like in the United States, I see black, I see white sitting down here peacefully. That's Puerto Ricans. That's not the problem. We the Puerto Ricans don't hate the Americans. What he's talking about is the international law. Is the international position. As he said at the beginning, colonialism is understood as an international crime.
Oh, I understand what he's saying.
And what he's talking about is in the international level. He, most part of his life, he pretty much grew up in here.
I grew up in Chicago.
In Chicago. And if you look into his history, you're going to find out that he organized many things socially in Chicago. Even there's a school that you helped to found in Chicago.
Still exists.
As an American, he has American citizenship, as we do. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about that if you are in Puerto Rico, if I go to Puerto Rico tomorrow for elections, I cannot vote for the president. But if I am in Clarksville, Tennessee, I can. We are second class citizens in Puerto Rico. We are a colony. We don't have the same rights if we're in the island with the American citizenship than if I am in Clarksville, Tennessee as an American citizen. Don't have the same rights. What is the difference standing on a piece of land? What's the difference? Well, the difference is that we are repressed, that they take away our rights, and that they take away what Preston was trying to define, our culture. If we want to express our culture, we are repressed. We do it over here, as everybody else do it, but as a nation, we are repressed. We cannot go to the Olympics as a nation. For example, we go under the American flag, but we cannot go independently as a nation. And that's what he's talking about. Is that I love this guy for the longest, and I love the Americans. I fought for the United States in Iraq and in Grenada, you know, and I love this land. But I do understand that as a Puerto Rican, I am a second-class citizen.
See, I don't feel like
Why didn't statehood pass the last time they tried to do it?
Because that's something.
Statehood?
Can I say that
Why
one
did
too?
Puerto
You
Rico
mean-
become a state the last time?
There was something that he
because
did.
the election.
What did it pass?
Yeah,
See,
let
you
me-
have to understand
let me
colonial
explain
elections.
that, yeah.
There's no enforcement
Yeah,
body
exactly.
for colonial elections.
Yeah.
You administer the colony, the plebiscite. How many times have they have a plebiscite in Puerto Rico, and let's say the statehood party wins? Does Puerto Rico become a state? Tell me, does it?
We don't have the right.
You
to
don't
do
have,
that.
it does, it's no enforcement body, it's just a popular contest.
There
and
was
that's
something
it.
that you jumped
You know?
that probably I can help.
Yeah.
Puerto Rico is governed by a law from the Congress, and it's the 600 law. It was a bill that it was presented in the Congress, and you guys are
1952.
very well
Yeah.
acquainted. They say who is in pro, who is in favor, aye, nay, and boom, the government of Puerto Rico happened. Now, under that government, Puerto Rico doesn't have the right to define himself, or to be state, or to be independent. Doesn't have that right. It's just a law to do administration of the island. Now, when in Puerto Rico, there's three different parts that I have mentioned. In Puerto Rico, the parties fight each other about us becoming full Americans or becoming independent or just staying as a colony. When they fight, about every 10 years, they get to the point that they say, let's do a plebiscite. For the ones that don't know what a plebiscite is, it's just a question that you ask to the electorate about something. You guys like hamburgers or hot dogs? So it's just a question. It doesn't have any validity. It's just a question we ask you. So on those questions that they have asked, Puerto Rico has never reached 51% in a consensus to nothing. So the United States had told the Puerto Ricans, if you guys don't reach a 51%, we're not going to listen to you. Now in the last plebiscite that the island had, we reached 51%. But Mr. Obama said, I don't care.
But the
We're
other
not
thing
going to
is that
listen anyways.
there's plebiscites that are internationally controlled. In order to be enforce a plebiscite, they have to be by the strict laws of international law. They have a way to decolonize Puerto Rico. The plebiscites are only a popular contest, just like the elections are. How many times has the statehood party won in Puerto Rico? They stood in power sometimes 8 years in power. Does Puerto Rico become a state? No. No possible.
Check right there.
Oh.
So we've got 2 more minutes left, and then he's going to be leaving here to go back out of the state of Tennessee. So to focus back on the topic, because we have him here for a very short few minutes, if there's anybody else that has questions within the next 2 minutes about the main topic, if you want to do more events related to the topic, plebiscite, statehood, and what's been going on with Puerto Rico, you can certainly contact the Hispanic Cultural Center. And our email is simple, hcc@apsu.edu, and we can organize another event. But to go back to the main topic, because we have him for only a few more minutes, if anybody else has other questions about the main topic, please raise your hand now.
I know that I've spoken a lot. Can I say one more thing? Oscar has been charged of many things, but has not been found guilty of any. I don't know if you mentioned it.
No, the charges is just conspiracy.
He was charged, but he was never found guilty.
No,
he
he's
was
not
charged
found
with
guilty of
bombing.
harming anybody or anything like
Yeah.
that, or killing somebody. That's the big difference. The charges is just conspiracy. But he didn't participate in his trial neither. So that's a whole different thing. I explained that to you.
He's been 35 years now.
32 and a half.
32 and a half
Yes.
years in jail, but he has never been found guilty of anything.
Are you asking us to do something specifically to support
So,
Oscar?
the political issue that I know you brought up is a whole different element, and it's an element that, besides the fact that, he's represented the independence movement, one of the things that in Puerto Rico that has united the whole country has only been one issue in Puerto Rico. That has been the political prisoners. In 1999, there was a union to let us free, and we were liberated, and today, there's one thing that unites Puerto Rico, is the liberation of Oscar, because this is exactly what it is, one of the human rights violations. And what we're asking you is, not in don't just the political situation, just like Puerto Rico has not, just like the statehood party has not, just like the Popular Party has not. The issue now is not the politics, but the human rights violation. Why do you keep somebody who has not killed or harmed anybody and keep them 33 years in prison? Murderers do less time. You know, rapists do more time. I know people who was in prison with me who did way less time and did a lot more. You know, and that's a whole different. His stand was not something against a human being, but it's not the political situation of Puerto Rico. And everybody understands that in Puerto Rico. You know, everybody in a lot of the world. You don't have Nobel laureates, international Nobel laureates supporting a man like him if he was not, that this is a human rights violation. You don't have a person like President Carter still supporting him, or Clinton still supporting him and letting him free if he had violated or he had done something to harm somebody. This is the situation that we find ourselves in. This is the violation of human rights, is continue to have him incarcerated. What is a 71-year-old man going to be? They have 14 examples of us that have been out of prison, and we have been productive, good citizens. What's going to make the difference with Oscar? That's the issue that I come here to discuss. Why do we continue to have him incarcerated? The issue of Puerto Rican independence we could debate, definitely, you know.
And I agree with you. That was I agree with you. I agree that he doesn't need to be incarcerated. But what I don't agree, like you said, to me it's two different topics.
It is.
It is two different topics. And then she just said, let's go back to the meaning of why we came here. And my question is then, what was the actual main point of this meeting? Was it for Oscar or was it for the independence?
Well, it was for both, but more for Oscar. This is for Oscar.
But that wasn't, and then let me clarify with you that wasn't what I was told. And when you explained that part, I'm on board. We're 100%, we're on the same level. That's why when she said, but that's what I didn't know that was the, I never heard of him before today. It's for 6:30, and I didn't know that was the main topic of the meeting.
Yeah, the main topic is, and what we're doing is we're collecting petitions, and we want to get 100,000 petitions during this, during the tours that I'm making in all of the United States, because in Puerto Rico we have quite a whole country, you know, easily 2 million, easy, that's no problem. But this country also has to put the pressure on Obama to say this is a human rights violation, you know, and you declare yourself to be a human rights. You talk about he went and talked about Nelson Mandela when he died, and about him being in prison 27 years, and about the violations and that he occurred. Your home has to sue, you know. This man has the same charge as Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela always supported our freedom. Even when I was incarcerated, he still supported Oscar to the last breath. Nelson Tutu also has done it. And why have you not done the right thing to do to release him that he should be? And that's what we are doing here, is to do petitions, and other people who accept that this is a violation of human rights to help us collect the 100,000 petitions in order for, when we meet with Obama, we present them with 100,000 petitions plus the one from Puerto Rico to say, this is what we want. We want him back home where he deserves to be.
We've got copies before you head out. There's in Spanish and in English, so you can sign them. We'll also be emailing them out to the Austin P students, or if you put your email in your community member. So before you head out, they have more information to give you about the petition for the release of Oscar. And
I'm going to be here for a while. I'm not going anywhere. So if you want to talk to me on the side or anything like that, I'm not going nowhere. I'm not leaving, you know, till later on. But if you want to discuss the issue, and I know it's a very hot issue for Puerto Ricans. I came to this country when I was 30 days old. So I grew up in Chicago. It's not like I'm not, you know, and I have very fond memories of this country all the time. You know, and like he said, I don't hate this country, you know, and I have no problems with it. But I am a very proud Puerto Rican. And statehood, for me, would be the elimination of the country of Puerto Rico, and that's what it is. Do I have a classic example? Yes, Hawaii. How much Hawaii regrets what they've done. You don't know what they go through right now to have lost their culture, their language, their ancestry, and there was a bad decision they made. Unreversible maybe, you know. I cannot have that done. I am going to be I was born a Puerto Rican, I live a Puerto Rican, and I will die a Puerto Rican for the rest of my life. And that nation is going to continue. And there's not going to be many people, you know, and I'm telling you, when it comes to bridges, to say no Puerto Rican nation and Puerto Rican nation, Puerto Rico's not going to respond, because that flag that we fly, we're so proud of it. But if we're going to destroy it and not have it no part of our nation, when it comes to fighting, if when it comes to that decision, Puerto Ricans are going to be Puerto Ricans forever. You know.
Please stay if you have a few minutes, but also support this local business. We were almost going to cancel this event because the university closed, so you can stay for a few if you're hungry, get something to eat. If you're going to head out, just let us know that we can put some of the tables back with the chairs. But thank you all for coming. We have other